Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to talk about something that keeps coming up in entertainment news. And that something is the issue of race swapping in films and television. Race swapping, of course, is the practice of taking a character that existed in its original incarnation, perhaps in a novel or a comic book or a previous TV show or film, and changing that character's race for a current TV show or film. And it happens a lot. It's been happening for a while, and it rubs people the wrong way a lot of the time. Some of the more famous cases over the years have been, for example, the fact that character of Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games films was race swapped, or at the time it was called whitewashed, because I guess the character is Asian in the original books, and of course was white in the films. Then there was Ghost in the Shell, which was, of course, originally a Japanese character and then portrayed in the film by a white actress. But what we seem to see more often now is the swapping of white characters for characters of color. And very often that's done when white characters are replaced by black characters. Sometimes they're Asian, sometimes they're Indian, which of course is Asian. But very often it's when a white character is replaced with a black version of that character, and people get upset by it. What's interesting is that not all of the people who are upset about it are white. There are black people who don't approve of this practice either. And the common refrain that you hear, both from white people and black people that are upset by this practice, is that movie studios, TV studios, etc., should be developing new black characters rather than swapping black characters in for white ones, or they should be developing existing black characters into TV shows and movies rather than, putting black people on screen by changing white characters into black characters. So while I haven't studied this anywhere near as closely or as much as someone would need to study it in order to give like a definitive analysis of it or a comprehensive analysis of it, I do want to give my analysis of it to the extent that I've sort of looked into it. And hopefully videos like this, whether they're comprehensive or not, can spur discussion, and that's what's going to solve the issue ultimately. Discussion and talking about it. I've talked about it very briefly in some of my other videos, and my position has been and remains that it's something that simply has to be done. Because what's happening now in Hollywood is that a lot of the productions that make it to screen now, be it the big screen or the small screen, are coming from big studios. Disney, whether it's Disney, traditional Disney properties, or Marvel stuff, or now, of course, Star Wars, or whether it's Warner Brothers with DC and its other properties. I mean, these are the blockbusters that dominate the theaters now, year in and year out, going back at least to the beginning of the MCU 15 years ago in 2007. It goes back further than that. But, because you had the Lord of the Rings films before that, you had the original Spider-Man films before that, you had the X-Men films. So it goes back a while. But at least since the beginning of the MCU, there have been 32 films, Marvel films. That includes 2 Deadpool films, which are not in the MCU, as well as Logan and the Fantastic Four movie, which are not actually in the MCU, but they're Marvel films. Just since 2007, in the last 15 years, there have been at least 16 Marvel shows in that time. DC has had 10 films since 2013, and also 16 shows, by my count at least, since 2012. That goes back 10 years. So between the two companies, just those two companies, in the last 15 years, there have been 72 projects. 72. Now, how many roles for Black actors were there in those 72 projects in 15 years without race swapping? You had Luke Cage, War Machine, Lucius Fox on 2 shows. You had Luke Fox. You had Mr. Terrific. You had Monica Rambeau, Captain Marvel. You had Sam Wilson as either Falcon or Captain America. You had that other super soldier that was on the Falcon and the Winter show, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier show, who was Black. You had T'Challa on Black Panther, and two or three other characters that were Black in that movie that had, lines and whatnot. You have Cyborg, who was on Doom Patrol and, of course, in the Justice League movie. And you had his father, the character of Cyborg's father, in that film and also on Doom Patrol. You had Amanda Waller. You have Steel on Superman and Lois. You had Black Lightning. You had that one character in Peacemaker, played by the lady who was in Orange is the New Black. You had Batwoman, which is a new character. It's not race swapped. The Javicia Leslie Batwoman. And you had Naomi. That's 22. Now, again, I may have missed some. The list might not be comprehensive, but I'm probably not missing more than 2 or 3 or 4. Okay. So right there, that's 22 roles for Black actors over the course of 15 years in 72 projects. And for each one of those Black characters in each one of those projects, there were multiple white characters. So if you had 22 Black characters, for each one of those, there were 2 or 3, maybe 4 white characters in each of those projects. So it's about a third of the projects that had a Black character or 2. And within that third, they were the minority still within each of those projects. Now, if you look at characters that were race swapped, you get several more Black characters in those same 72 projects. You get Perry White, Johnny Storm, Jimmy Olsen's sister, Starfire, Electro, Nick Fury, who was originally white. He's been Black for a long time, but he was originally white in the comics. Valkyrie, Phastos, Zod and Zod's daughter on the show Krypton. You had Heimdall. You have Iris West, Wally West, and Joe West. That's 15 more characters. Again, I may not be thinking of all of them. These are the ones that I came up with either in my head or looking at lists of various projects that have come out in recent history. And these are the characters that I recalled. So 15. That brings the number to 37. So as I was saying, it's 1 or 2 roles in about half the 72 projects by comic book movie companies in the last 15 years. And then 1 or 2 roles in about a third of the projects by comic book companies in the last 15 years without race swapping. So it goes down from half to a third without race swapping. And so you're talking about, not only are you talking about these small numbers, this crazy ratio, but you're literally talking about project after project after project that would not have any Black characters in them at all without race swapping. Without race swapping, there would have been 0 Black characters in Supergirl, the show, which ran for 6 seasons, not counting Ja'on Jones, which was never a white character either. He was either green or he took the shape of someone else. 0 without him, 0. And that's not a race swapped character or a non-race swapped character. So he's kind of not part of the equation, but it would have been 0. Without race swapping, there would have been 0 Black characters in the Man of Steel movie. 0 without Perry White being Black. 0. Without race swapping, there was 1 Black character on the show Arrow that ran for 8 seasons, and that character wasn't in all 8 seasons. It didn't show up until several seasons in. The character Mr. Terrific. On The Flash, there are two race swapped characters that were originally white and then black in the comics, or black on the show. And there's one black character that's the father of those two characters that was invented for the show, but without race swapping, neither of those three characters would be black on the show. And there would have been 0 black characters on that show. 9 seasons, 8 already aired, 1 coming. 0. The most recent Fantastic Four film had 2 black characters. The second one was the father of the first one, which was a race swapped character from the original comics. Without race swapping, both of those characters would have been white, and there would have been 0 black characters in that movie. 0. Now, getting away from superhero stuff, Lost in Space ran for 3 seasons on Netflix and had 2 black characters that I recall. And the only reason the second one was black is because the first one was his biological daughter, and that character was race swapped from the original Lost in Space. Other than that, there would have been 0 black characters on that show. 0. There were 6 Lord of the Rings films. This, of course, goes back to before the MCU. 6 of them. 0 black characters that weren't under creature makeup. Disney live action films based on cartoons. There have been 19 or 20 Disney live action films that were based on cartoons in the last several years. And by my count, there were 3 or 4 black characters in all of those movies total. And in the latest one, Pinocchio, there would be 0 black characters without race swapping, but there are 2, not counting Idris Elba's character, which was a fox in the original and neither white or black. Without changing the lore of stormtroopers, there would have been no black characters in the Star Wars sequels. And as it is, there was 1. Now, why? Why is this the case? Is it because people like Stan Lee and Carmine Infantino, I think is the name, who created The Flash, people like Jack Kirby, and those people were racist? Is it because they were racist? I don't think so. I have no reason to believe that's the case. But they weren't running Marvel Comics. They weren't running DC Comics. They were just the creators of several of the iconic characters. And they just created white characters because, first of all, they're white. And that's what they're going to do, right? And secondly, the fact of the matter is that when these characters were created, and you could bring up Bob Kane from the 30s, okay? Before I move on, Bob Kane, who created Batman, was he racist? I have no reason to believe that. Were the 2 brothers that created Superman racist? I have no reason to believe that. That goes all the way back to the 30s. Stan Lee, of course, and Jack Kirby and those guys were the 60s. Were all of those guys racist? Is that why they didn't come with black characters? I don't think so. I think what's more likely, behind the fact that those guys and everybody else who was writing for comics at the time, save for 1 or 2 people, created white characters, is because the public was super racist back then. And black heroes would have been rejected. At least that's what the thinking was. So none were made. Then around the time of the civil rights movement and thereafter, a handful of black characters were created by comic companies, but that was largely so the comic book companies could capitalize on whatever success there was of the new blaxploitation film industry that was emerging. And those heroes never became as popular as Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, Wonder Woman, etc. Why? I wouldn't say it's because of racism necessarily, but let's say there was a lack of an appetite among the larger public for black characters for one reason or another. And it might have been because those are not the characters that the companies pushed because of their perceptions about what would sell or what it made sense to promote and what it didn't make sense to promote, based at least partly on racial thinking. So those characters still exist. And, people say, well, let's make movies about those. Why do they have to race swap characters? Why can't they make movies about those? Because the industry doesn't trust that those characters will sell and they're not going to make movies about them. And those characters are now relegated mostly to sidekick status in these new productions, or secondary character status. Viola Davis recently explained that without the success of Black Panther, her most recent film, Woman King, probably wouldn't have gotten made because production companies don't trust that Black centered movies will be successful enough because they don't believe that majority white audiences will support them. And the fact is that studios still don't trust this largely. And Black Panther was an incredible success, but for some reason they look at it as a fluke. So they're just not investing in these Black heroes. They had the Luke Cage TV show, and I think it had 2 seasons before the plug was pulled, and that was because of corporate licensing bullshit. And, the fact that Disney Plus was coming out and they were going to have the Marvel shows and all that nonsense. So the Netflix show was canceled along with all the other ones. But, for whatever reason, these characters aren't being given blockbuster films. Batgirl was canceled because the new chief at Warner didn't think it was a blockbuster. It's a coincidence, right, that the main character, that girl was Black. Why did Naomi get canceled? I don't know. Certainly is interesting, though, right? It got 1 season. Black Lightning was the shortest running of the Arrowverse shows. Why? Lovecraft Country was a show that was Black centric. It was a very good show. It got canceled after 1 season. Why? If you talk to the anti-woke crowd, they'll tell you it's because the characters were Black. They say the show went woke and went broke. Did it not work because the characters were Black? I don't know. But the studio didn't renew it for a second season. So for their money, it wasn't as successful as they wanted to be, or they didn't think it would be in a second season. Watchmen was Black centric and got canceled after 1 season. Why? I don't know. But it's certainly interesting. So what am I saying here? Am I saying that that should just be allowed to continue and audiences, Black or white, should be happy with these little scraps of these sidekick Black characters that are thrown to them, or these race swapped sidekick Black characters that are thrown to them? Sidekicks, original or race swapped, should they be happy with that? No. So when people say, come up with new Black characters or give existing Black characters films and TV shows, don't race swap characters. My response is they should absolutely be giving TV shows and film projects to Black characters that already exist. Certainly, new Black characters that are created should be greenlit for distribution in comic form, in TV show form, in movie form, whatever. That should absolutely happen. But I don't think that Black actors should be locked out of every other production in Hollywood, whether it's a Star Wars production. There are no Black characters in Obi-Wan Kenobi or The Mandalorian or Book of Boba Fett that I recall. The new Lord of the Rings show has Black characters, and people are losing their minds over it because there were no Black characters in the original material. They're losing their minds over Black Ariel in The Little Mermaid. They're losing their minds over Black characters in the Game of Thrones sequel show, which, by the way, comes out only a few years after the original Game of Thrones show ended, and that show had no Black characters because the original material was written by a white guy who, he's going to write white people. So, of course, Black centric projects should be given a chance. Of course, existing Black characters should be more promoted by the companies that own them, Marvel, DC, what have you. Of course, studios should be looking at Black centric novels and comics and whatnot to turn into films and TV shows. But for whatever reason, they're not doing that right now. One day they might. So the question is, until that day, should we really have a situation where, because all of these properties that are being made left and right into movies and TV shows were created 80 years ago, 60 years ago by white people in a very racist time, get made without any black actors in them? Should black actors be completely locked out of project after project after project after project, whether it's a Netflix show, an Amazon show, an HBO Max show, a Disney show, over and over and over again, because Hollywood is determined to not make new things and to not take properties that aren't already popularized and make stuff out of those? Should that really mean that black actors can't get work? Like, I'm saying can't get work. There were 22 characters, right, out of 70 Marvel films or whatever it was that I said. But like, that's a pittance. And it's still a pittance with the additional characters that were race swapped. So this idea that they shouldn't race swap because the original characters were white and they should stay that way, or they shouldn't race swap because, you know, in the words of some black people that I've talked to, they don't want, token characters tossed to them like, table scraps that used to be white. They want their own, culture explored and their own characters that already exist explored, which I agree with. But that's something we have to work towards while we're giving black actors these roles that would normally have been played by white actors, for the simple fact that it's going to take a long time to fix that. And there should not be a situation where, the new Lord of the Rings show doesn't have black actors. They're talking about a Buffy reboot, okay, and they wanted to make the main character black. But if they didn't, and they didn't race swap any of the characters from the original show, and they kept them all, there would be 0 black people in that show. Should that happen? Absolutely not. Not while we have a situation where all Hollywood is doing is making new projects out of these old things that were created during a time when the mindset was that black characters wouldn't sell, or, reflective of the creator's own whiteness in an environment where black creators just weren't on equal footing because of racism, probably conscious or unconscious. I don't think that's acceptable. I don't think it's acceptable to lock black actors out of all these superhero movies, all these fantasy films, all the cartoons made live action by the big companies, Disney, Warner Brothers, Netflix, Amazon. I don't think we should accept that. And I, for one, am glad that black actors are given the chance to be in movies like Pinocchio and to be in shows like Lord of the Rings. Go back and look at the Spider-Man films from before the MCU. There were 3 of them, actually 5 of them. There were 0, well, 1. There was 1 black character in all of those 5 films, Electro, and he was race swapped. There were 0 black characters in the first 3. 0. It's just absurd. It took place in New York City. 0 black characters. Ridiculous. They solved that in the last 3 Spider-Man movies by including characters of color, none of whom were black, but at least it was more reflective of actual society that's not just all white. So that's my feeling. I think we have to have black Ariel. I think we have to have black stormtroopers. We have to have black Johnny Storm. I think it has to be that way until black creators achieve parity with white creators and are able to put forth black characters that will get screen time, that will get their own projects. Because the alternative is to have virtually no black characters in all of these properties that are getting made. A fraction of the white characters. It's absurd. So anyway, I'm repeating myself. I'm going to get out of here. Before I go, I do want to remind you about my Teespring store. I have t-shirts there with the show logo on it and other things, and there's other products. If you pick some of those up, it supports the channel, so I'd appreciate it. But until I return, I wish you peace and long life.